What's up, everybody? My name is Galson Anthony, the best to ever do it. Now, it's politics all over again, and I have to keep reminding y'all to be nice in the comment section because y'all always play it dirty, and I play dirty when you play dirty. I got no shame doing that. But the idea here is to build, construct as a nation, as a people, not to try and destroy people like the internet usually does. Introducing my guest today, a political activist. Generally, we look at political activists as being black. This is a young white man, very interesting. His name is Pieter Kriel. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure. How did you like my intro? Because I called you white, like I just racialized you out of the gate.
Well, I don't take offense to being called white. I do think that biologically and in the realm of everything that's objective, I seem to be a white man. And it's constructive. It was a constructive greeting and an announcement, and I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
It's just when people use it out of context or, trying to hurt people's feelings or dehumanize a person, then I do take offense.
So, our discussion, I don't know if you're familiar to the G2G podcast, we go in deep and we really dig and, test as far as possible. Are you ready for that?
Yep.
The idea here is, as you know, it's not like in other instances to try to mock you and try to make you look like the bad guy. But although you are fallible like I and everybody else, we're going to look for that and try and see how we can build together. Are you ready for this? Let's start off. Are you a Marxist?
No, I don't think I'm a Marxist. I love Karl Marx's ideas, but I do think that that problems of the 21st century require solutions of the 21st century. I love his ideas of the redistribution, of trying to, bring everyone to exact same levels. And his critique of capitalism seems to me to have been the best critique capitalism has ever received.
And what are those critiques that you reckon that were great? Because consider he's a delinquent himself.
Well, like I said, I don't uphold everything Karl Marx stood for as a person, because at the end of the day, he was a person of his time, and some of his racist ideas came through in the way he spoke and wrote. But when I say his critique of capitalism, I mean that when we think of the fall of capitalism, we usually describe it as, the turn of one event to another. But Karl Marx said that the system isn't going to end itself. It wouldn't come by voting or by bringing about political change. It will be by the collapse of the capitalist system. So I wouldn't be the best person to advocate for his policies, but my view is that his critique of everything that has led to, let's say, the 1920s and the stock market crash, which is one of the worst capitalist catastrophes in history.
After World War, we got to consider that there was a World War from then.
I think so, but we do have to take into account that in the East, we didn't have the amount of bad happening in the United States during the 1920s, which was a result of capitalist markets and the influence of capitalism. That didn't happen in the East. It didn't happen in Europe, in certain parts of Europe.
Because they were communists. Okay, so he wasn't alive at that time. 1920, did he die? Because I know that he was born in the 1800s and his book was published in the 1800s. I don't know if he was there in the early 1900s. But for me, he was a complete idiot, because although he was accurate in some instances as far as communism is concerned and bringing people to an equal level, these people will equally suffer or equally be good. But usually when they're good, it's only for a short period of time or less. Have you read the Communist Manifesto?
I've read parts of it. I've read most of it in part, but I've never sat down and read it. Yeah.
Okay.
But I've studied Communist Manifesto.
You studied, in parts of it. Now, before we started this interview, you said you saw that I did an interview with
Herman Mashaba.
Yeah. And you said that I would relate to him more than relate with you. Why did you say that?
Well, when I've listened to a few of your podcasts in part, and I have to admit that you're well educated, you're well read, and you take the time to listen to the opponent's, if I may, viewpoint, worldview, which says something about your intellectual integrity and ability. And I resonate with that. But at the same at the same time, I do feel that your business side perhaps comes through. It does, to me, sound like you code as a business type person. And I see that stemming from either liberalism or neoliberalism, or perhaps a kind of, capital liberalism or something like that. But I don't see you advocating for the redistribution of wealth. I do think that, people of African descent really do have ancestral ties to this continent. And I think it's stupid that Africa has borders, keeping people that know they should be together apart. So to me, it's all about the unity of Africa, and Africa saying, this is what we are going to do, and this is our terms to the West and to the East, because now the West is approaching Africa, the East is approaching Africa on their terms. For centuries, African people by descent have been taken advantage of by colonialism, by apartheid. And I say that not as an apologist for any of these, because I will never apologize for something I was not a part of. But I say it as a kind of acknowledgement that, you know what, there was a mistake in the past and we need to work towards fixing those mistakes. I agree with you on certain things about Karl Marx. His idea of the redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor in the 21st century, I do think is flawed by nature.
He's trying to be Robin Hood, except being a delinquent version of it, where he tells people what to do as opposed to doing it himself, because he just sat in the back room of
most of his life.
Yeah, most of his life. So I
don't know
if we
funded
should,
by his partner.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we should be listening to somebody like that who never actually put it into practice. Yeah. I actually feel like there's a lot of evil in him. Now, when I look at Karl Marx, now we're on the topic of Karl Marx, I see a little bit of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, where the serpent said to the woman, you know what, you can redistribute power, right? It does not need to be in one place, it can be redistributed. Why do you have to listen to that dictatorship? You could have the same equal power. Look where it led us now. Now somebody would have an argument and be like, that's flawed, because that's just three people, or three entities that were, as opposed to millions of people around the world. I'm like, look at it and look at it very, very carefully. Now, I'm not anti-socialism or anti-communism. I'm just saying that you cannot have it as a main system.
It's flawed.
It's flawed. Yeah, it's completely flawed. So we agree with that. Okay.
But I agree with social nets like temporary relief like grants and other social nets like healthcare and schooling and things like that. I do agree with. But like I did say,
the European system, because that's how the European system works. It's a capitalist system that has a thread of socialism in it, including Sweden. It's more capitalist, much more than it is
a lot of these Scandinavian countries. But I always make the point towards China, even though I'm a critique of any imperialist state, whether from the left or right. What we have to acknowledge is that they've lifted 1 billion people out of poverty in 50 years. And they did that not through socialism or communism. They did that through socialist philosophy in their politics, but with capitalist economics. They are free market to a certain extent. They are not purely communist. And that's why I do think that people speaking of left and right in 2025, it's outdated. Because,
it's rather dated, because that is more of a new ideology. Okay, an ideology that became popular now. Although it started just after Second World War, but it became more popular in our
left
time.
Left and right?
Right.
I think it started with the Industrial Revolution, right? No, it started French Revolution.
Was that the early, just before World War?
18 something.
Yes, just before the World War, yes, but it's been more popularized now. But I want us to move to a place where it's more relevant for us now. You advocate for a lot of black people in so many ways. Why so?
Well, injustice hurts me, right? So I grew up in a divorced house. So I think people who've experienced what I've experienced growing up in a divorced house, they tend to notice detail in life. Because,
what kind of details?
So let's say one thing would be familiar and appropriate in one house, and something would be totally inappropriate and unfamiliar in another house, and like let's say dad's house per se to mom's house. And you pick up on these things. You pick up on how dad acts and how mom acts. So to me, when I drive from, let's say, somewhere in Sandton outwards towards Alexandra, I immediately pick up on a shift in everything, not just in the economics and the politics and the people's lives, but you pick up that the air is different. People live in poverty. Poverty is unkind. Inequality is unkind. And I do genuinely think that if we advocate for the upliftment of all communities, I think that all communities would equally contribute to the economy. Because at this point, it's disproportionate that the effects of apartheid has made it relevant that white people contribute more to tax and to the economy. That's a fact. That's a statistical fact.
60% of white people are the ones that pay the tax in South Africa.
Yeah.
And which I'd have to ask you a question much more in the future and prepare yourself for it, because now the thing is redistribution means if less white people pay tax and it's more distributed to a culture where they're not cultured to paying tax, we're going to have an issue, and socialism would not work in that regard. But continue your statement before I...
Yeah, to touch on that, I do think relief, like everything needs to be temporary. I recently had a debate with the ANC Youth League President Colin, and he's been talking about grants for 5 years. The ANC has been talking about grants for 30 years. I do think they are necessary, but as a temporary relief, because at a certain stage, we have to ask, when do they start creating what's it called? People being dependence on the government, right?
And that's what socialism does. It makes people dependent onto the government, so the government becomes their boss.
If the government fails in step 2, step 1 is grants relief. Step 2 is creating sustainability. That is where our government has failed. And that is where every communist, socialist regime in history has failed, is because they failed to create sustainability in the environment, because they've taken power and they consolidated that power and concentrated it and made it central. And that is where everything has gone wrong. And that's where it's gone wrong in the ANC.
Okay, so you have a very good understanding of that, so we don't even need to argue further about that. Now I want to ask you back into the question of black people. Do you keep black people accountable, or do you only keep white people accountable?
I keep the human race accountable wherever necessary.
Wherever necessary. Where have you kept black people accountable?
I've spoken extensively about Jacob Zuma.
Black people, not black person.
Of black people. I take huge offense to black leaders selling their people to slavery during the colonial trade.
That is still too far up. Let's go to like an everyday thing, because this is a very, very tough conversation. I've dated all races. I've married more than once, so I've got multiple backgrounds as far as that. I'm a half and half myself. So with all races, I keep everyone accountable. And I'm not apologetic about that. Now, the thing is, you are a young man, and I'm not trying to be one of those people that is trying to say you know nothing, right? We learn as we go. I was once a young man. Do you keep black people accountable as you advocate for them? I'll give you a further example. Look at the taxi rank. When you go to a taxi rank, filth.
Yep.
In the middle of Sandton, filthy. Sandton's clean, taxi rank's dirty. Do you go to black people around you and say, look, black folks, I understand that you come from poverty. I understand that this system is not working for you, but could you please keep the taxi ranks clean? Do you do stuff like that?
And I think it's important. I've always advocated for, my grandmother used to tell me that a person can be extremely poor, but you have to be clean. And I have always advocated for accountability. I don't think like I said, I don't think the revolution, I advocate for a thought revolution. That people should...
What's a thought revolution?
People need to awaken from the idea that there is a savior coming and that they will be saved. That's not happening. Africa is not being saved by no savior. It's up to Africans to save themselves. And that's what I advocate for. I advocate for the freedom of speech, for free thought, for debates, and for intellectual integrity and all of these things. It needs to be implemented into much more of the frameworks of society, because...
Correct.
Even in townships, because I have been invited, with my platform, I've been invited to ANC debates, I've been invited to roundtable discussions, but that is not happening in townships. And that is the debates and the discussions and the intellectual fights we need to have. But that is up to Africans to do. my work lies within my own community, right? Even though I do
What is your community, demographic-wise?
Afrikaans people. So I was
When
raised...
you say your community, you referring to where you live in Heidelberg or just in general?
I do specifically talk about Heidelberg because for me, Heidelberg has been rather toxic in its approach to politics and life. It's a very judgmental town, in my opinion. And
I think every single town is judgmental.
You think so?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think so.
I mean, we live in San is judgmental as hell.
Yeah, it's probably, but on a different level, right? Because I think in Heidelberg, which is very conservative, you only get to be Afrikaans and call yourself Afrikaans if you live up to what a nostalgic version of Afrikaans means. And I refuse to do that because I do believe in evolution in all forms.
I believe in evolution just like you do. But the issue is that from an instant, because now I'm trying to call you into account here, is that, sure, a young white man, just for the sake of description, young white man trying to advocate for the black people, which are rightfully the owners of the land and so forth.
But I would not. I don't.
All right.
I don't advocate for black people.
Don't you?
Because
it does sound like a lot of optics.
I advocate against injustice.
Injustice, okay.
And if black people align with that, so be it. I don't speak for black people, and I don't speak for Africa. But I want to speak with them, not for them. Okay. Because when I speak for them, it goes back to the type of thing I want to deconstruct. It's white superiority complex. It's the assurance of correctness.
Then you wouldn't be any different to say a nota who speaks for black people. Would it be like a nota superiority complex in that regard?
I wouldn't comment on whether nota speaks for black people. In my opinion, that is rather subjective. I think sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't.
He's a populist, that I know, that we all know.
I think he aligns with some populist ideas. Like you've mentioned earlier, you view me as a person who holds some populist ideas. And I do agree with some of the things I have said probably aligns with what populists have said. But I think when I advocate for this, I've been advocating for this extensively for the last year. I've been a political activist. And only very recently have I gained any attention. And I recently said on a podcast, I'd do this for the rest of my life if I have somewhere to sleep, if I have some food, and I get some travel and all of that. To me, it's not about money. To me, payment is a person on the street coming up to me and saying, thank you, we've read one of your articles, it's meant a lot to me.
Do you know why I struggle to believe that? Everybody starts there, and then they go haywire, right? So this is how politics work.
That's how humans work.
That is 100% correct. So now the question is, are you going to be that guy where he's like, okay, you know what, I was doing this in the beginning, then you get somebody giving you a call, probably from Russia, China, or probably a country that resonates with what you do. They sit you around the table, they're like, look, man, we've got about $100 million or 100 million rand to fund you so you can push our agenda. And then you're like, okay, cool, great Mercedes-Benz, great house in Santon, and boom, I'm blocked off and having security. Would that be you? And listen, your answer in 5 years' time is something I'll be accounting you for.
It's going to be different to now. I'd say that I don't know if I'd be going into politics anytime soon. That's something I have to announce. But if I have to, it wouldn't be to go into the system. I don't believe in going into the system. I believe that this system needs to be burnt down. It needs to be replaced.
Okay, Marxist.
Now, if you've
Marxist.
If you've read some of the ideas of Lenin, per se, right? He spoke about independent community assemblies. That is something I resonate with because it doesn't centralize power. It puts power in the hands of the people. What we do is
democracy is also power in the hands of the people.
Does it?
Yes, it does. Just a systematic version of it. It's just the thing is, now here's a thing that people everybody wants to pull as far as stream as possible. I do not understand why, right? Like, for example, I wanted to ask you, because you have some of those ideologies, would you vote for Julius Malema?
I voted for him in 2024.
Why?
Because I did view his manifesto as being the most realistic for what I envisioned a more equal and equitable society. But I have to be very realistic with you. Would I vote for him in 2026? No, I wouldn't.
So what was the difference between then and 2026?
You know what? I think everything that he advocated for, I resonated with. But I think I was blind to the fact that when we look at what's happening within the EFF, it's very centralized.
Yeah, it's very tyrannical and very authoritarianism. Actually, totalitarianism.
Let me call it centralized. You'll call it authoritarian.
No, it is. He is. Yeah. I mean, why do we have to lie about this what it is? Yeah. And I've got nothing against him as an individual. I just got everything against him as a not as a politician. I feel like he is eluding people a certain way, trying to mess with people's minds. And the poor people are falling for his tricks. So that
perhaps he's strayed a bit, but we have to take into account that he's been active in politics since he was
14.
8, 9.
Yeah, he was pretty young.
He knows what politics is about. It's about sustainability. We spoke about that earlier. How long did that hold? And I think it's because he centralized it all to 1 or 2 or 3 positions within a party, which really is where, like I said earlier, all socialist, communist, Marxist ideas go wrong, is by the centralization of power. And that is why I do think we need independent community assemblies all across the country, where ordinary citizens and not politicians get together, talk about what they want, how they're going to do it, and make the government listen. If you have 100 people gather in Heidelberg...
That is actually called democracy, just worded a little bit different. The thing is, power is to the people in democracy. And the thing is that people have gerrymandered democracy to be something completely different. The moment somebody gets out of line, you throw them out of government.
Yeah, but is democracy that? Because in 30 years, we've not built one community assembly in one city. What we've done is we've given that structures to people by voting. Let's be honest, not everyone votes. That's a protest in some sort by not wanting to vote, right? A government should be held accountable, and people showing up to vote is sort of a paper showing that accountability. So when people don't vote, it shows. And every time, for the last 30 years, we've voted for politicians. We've centralized power in the structures of democracy. We've given it to the people so that all of these government leaders in the ANC and the DA and the EFF can get together. I did this a few weeks ago in Houghton at the roundabout table and talk about poverty. But when we talk about going to Alexandra and to other townships, that just doesn't happen. You don't have politicians.
I'm going to ask it like this. Which country doesn't have poverty?
I think every country has poverty, but what do we define as the barriers of poverty, right? Let's be honest, we have a lot of homelessness in the United States as well as South Africa compared to China. Mm-hmm. China has poverty.
So that's what communism does, right? So communism lowers the homelessness. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the advantage, and that's what communists or social parties are busy selling. Now, we spoke about centralizing of power, and you said something about centralizing of power that democracy does. Yes, I guess in every form, all power is centralized, so people can, run the government, so to put it. But democracy is not as centralized as you may think, because power is still within the people. We can remove you. With socialism, that's that. You cannot be removed. With communism, that's that.
Can we remove the ANC though? We've been trying actively for 30 years. Let's assume
we're still in a capitalist state, right? So South Africa is about 70% to 60% populist, communist state. But they themselves are communists. So you can't remove the president.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Which part wouldn't you agree?
I wouldn't agree that we are communist.
No, not the country. I'm talking about ANC. Unless, of course, you're at ANC and you're referring to we.
No, look, I've aligned with ANC on many initiatives. I've spoken at lectures and all of that. And I've recently told MK when I was invited to join it. I said I wouldn't be interested in joining MK.
And why is that you wouldn't join MK?
Because
they're not a communist.
No, to me it feels like it'd be hypocritical, because I've advocated for Africa to be less dependent on white capital, and yet Jacob Zuma is a figure that takes baths in white capital.
Explain.
Well, he's extensively had investment from from all sorts of billionaires in South Africa.
But that's how politics works. It's like politicians are funded by billionaires so that they can have their own agenda, built through. If I'm a billionaire and you happen to be president or running for the president, I'll walk up to you, it's like, look, man, I'm going to give you some money, but make sure that I get my tender in this and this and this and this place. I subtly talk to you. Then if I see somebody's talking against me, then I say, hey, man, a couple of $100 million to get that person out my way. That is how it works. So unfortunately, that is not just a South African thing, it's worldwide. It just depends on how far they're going to push the corruption. Now, the question becomes is that you are not voting for MK because you feel like Jacob Zuma has, put his hands in white billionaire money.
Not just that. I wouldn't vote for a person who's been accused of rape by a young female. And that, to me, whether that be true or not, that's not for me to comment on. But I'm inclined to usually believe the victims, especially when it's people in immense positions of power. Yeah, I think
that's a little misandry just to believe the victims by virtue of them just saying, right? Obviously, I believe there should be proof, and I do understand it as governments or systems that make it hard for the victims to come up with the evidence and even make it clear so that they can be judged. But here's a question. Do you vote for somebody based on their morality, or do you base somebody on their ability to deliver what they're going to say, like policies, their ability to run the country? What is your base?
See, that is where...
Because if that's the case, then you have to remove Marx, Karl Marx out of there because he's a delinquent. We shouldn't listen to him.
Yeah, but see, so his critique of capitalism is what I hold on to. And some of these ideas, I don't think Karl Marx, by any virtue, is a great human being, because in my opinion he did sponge on quite a few people for extensive periods of his life.
So then you must see Jacob Zuma and Marx as the same person.
No, I think whereas Marx was one of the most influential theorists ever, that's not debatable, because the West has spent trillions on fighting the ideas of Marxism, so it's been influential. Jacob Zuma, I admire him in a different way. He's been influential in organizing the people. When Jacob Zuma says jump, the people is ready to jump. He just has to say how high. And I respect him for his influence in political influence. But his rhetoric, his morality, his ethics, that I don't align with. To me, it's not just about good governance, because good governance for who? We can talk about the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape. Good governance.
We'll get there. We will try.
Yeah, but good governance for the people in the CBDs, but not for the people in Khayelitsha.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have empathy and ask people, and ask the colored boy from the Cape Flats, do you feel the Democratic Alliance is working for you?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When he's being shot at, and he'll tell you, I don't think it's working for me.
This is where I wanted to come back to the cultures between the people, because this is what people are missing from my perspective, is that they're talking more of a political system as opposed to a cultural system. That's why I asked you to advocate for Black people. But now we're talking about Western Cape and Democratic Alliance. Now, Democratic Alliance seem to have been running Cape Town pretty good. When we say Cape Town, as far as you can smell the beach, that's Cape Town. When you go into the inner side, that's no longer Cape Town. There's just a part or a district of Cape Town. It's a completely different place. Murder per capita is very, very high. The poverty is much higher than most cities, if not all cities in South Africa and more. What do you think Democratic Alliance agenda is? Are they just trying to take care of their people, which is the white people, or...
I don't necessarily think that it's blatantly the white people. Helen Zille was a anti-apartheid activist, whether we like that or not. I don't like it, but she was one.
You don't like the fact that she was anti-apartheid?
I don't like the fact that it was coded, and I'm getting to that, because to a large extent, these liberals during the end of apartheid extensively fought against apartheid because it was in the interest of the middle class, white or black, right? So that is why they fought against the end of apartheid. Whether she did it because she extensively believed in the humanity, which is what I advocate for, is humanity and Ubuntu and all of that. Because at the end of the day, we're in Africa, and we need to align with African values and African ideals and things like that.
Pause. I don't disagree with you, but I got a little gripe with something. It's like you said that the liberal people, we're talking about PFP, we're talking about these liberal parties that you're referring to, right?
Yeah,
They fought apartheid. 100% for their own interest. That's what you're alluding to.
I think.
And I wanted to make an example. You got a wife or a girlfriend and somebody breaks into the house and you overpower the guy and beat him up, or whatever the case may be, tie him up. And then your woman says you only fought him because you have a brand new car and you didn't want him to take that. And she said it wasn't to my benefit. You just wanted to save your car. How would you feel about that?
Well, I think the starting point of that argument is flawed within itself. It kind of puts a disadvantage to me answering it, because what relation do you tie that to poverty relating to crime? Because that's a fact.
It goes back to the question that I'm asking you. Do you think that DA is actually fighting for their own people, which is the white people?
Perhaps the middle class.
The middle class.
Perhaps the middle class.
And we understand that we acknowledge that Cape Town, when you go into the inner sides, Cape Flats, and all the townships, it's a mess there.
Yeah. I just want to tie the lines to the Democratic Alliance fighting for the interests of the middle class, largely like they do today. And the middle class consists today of white and black people. But we cannot deny the fact that the majority of the Democratic Alliance people of positions in power are white people. That's a fact. And what they've been advocating for, in my opinion, has been, pro-white in its approach. Tying it back to the Democratic Alliance to 20 or 30 years ago, when it perhaps was still the Democratic Party, they fought against apartheid largely because it would be in the interest of the middle class of that time. And I say that because South Africa was under immense stress from the international community. Sanctions, political desperation, economical desperation, and all of that, and from within. So
aren't you just happy that apartheid is dead, irrespective of, the reason they fought for it?
Is apartheid dead?
All right, I know you're going to turn it into neo-colonialism conversation and so much more, but then the rough structure of it is gone. Shouldn't we be like, the acknowledgement of that is gone, and now all the other effects that we can...
I think the redistribution of wealth really is easy. I'll tell you why I say so. Because it happened in Zimbabwe and it failed. It's easy to redistribute wealth. But what we cannot easily redistribute or deconstruct is mental wealth, is mental privilege.
Beautiful. I love that.
I say that because for 30 years, white South Africans have resonated with their superiority, with the belief of their superiority, and with the West, instead of resonating with African brothers and sisters, trying to fix the system here, which would only benefit the entire Africa.
How do you think you're superior to me? You're white and black.
Yeah, I think it's in how I was brought up in life, not necessarily me, but white people as a whole, especially during apartheid. We were taught swart gevaar, black danger. We were taught in church, which is God's authority, right? White people were systemically taught that they were superior to black people.
But that happens everywhere. Black people
Not
think
in every
they're superior.
church.
Not necessarily church, but in different cultures, people think they're superior to people all the time. I don't think this should be down to blaming white people alone. Go to Zulus. Zulus believe they're God's given gift to black people in South Africa. Hell, if I were, full on South African, I'd want to be Zulu because, boom, they've got that vigor, they got that vim. I liken them to Afrikaans people because they are quite similar in that regard.
You and Nota are the same in that regard.
What?
He also links them to Zulu people, Afrikaans people. Like
I think I said it first, and then he picked up from that point onwards.
Maybe.
So the thing is that problem is there and there, but the factor that people are making it about race, including yourself, I think it's a bit pernicious.
But have Zulu people systemically oppressed white people?
Look,
because we came to Africa, let's say in 1652, right, and we imposed Western philosophy and Western history and Western schools of thought onto African people. So when we left at the end of colonialization, this is my point tying back to mental privilege, we left one thing. We took with us the colonizers and the settlers and all of the, colonizers. But what we left was colonialism. We left Western thought and Western governance and Western philosophies for Africans to figure out when Africans really had their own philosophies and all of that. So I always say we have to look at this with empathy. How would Europeans feel if Africans came to Europe?
Beautiful. I'll tell you what I would have done.
Yeah.
Right. If I and maybe 20,000 black people decided to go to England, for example, the English don't come for me. This is just an example. And I get there and I decide, you know what, I need to survive in 20,000. My people need to survive too. Okay, I'd make sure that I attack them, govern them in such a way that is oppressive to them because they outnumber me, and make sure that my people have a space there. Is that evil? Absolutely evil.
But
It's evil in every sort of way. But the thing is that human survival kicks into place. Now, let's say, for example, I rule over 100 years and me and my rest of my black people become hyper rich. And they say, look, man, all the white people are in poverty. We need to redistribute the land because it was unfair of you 100 years ago. I agree. Now, what happens is the method. You understand? But if a black person pops out of nowhere from my 20,000 to be an activist for the white people in the regard that you're doing, and I'll be like, it doesn't feel genuine as it is, because the thing is, the system exists and has been existing for 100 years. Me and my descendants have been ruling over England. But now the thing is that having a revolution would destroy everything, because I don't remember any revolution that has worked to date. Revolutions have
I can name you quite a few. The French Revolution was quite successful. The French population lived in extreme poverty. That's a statistical fact. And they killed the queen through revolution. That's where we get left and right. We had conservatives and we had liberals.
If you're talking about monarch revolutions, they all failed. I mean, there's no monarchies that is absolute monarchies that exist.
Unless they adapt, like...
Now that's why I'm happening. Adapt.
So that is what the British monarchy has been doing for, I think it might be 1,000 years, it might be a bit less. They've had a constitutional monarchy. They've recognized that concentrated power doesn't work, because at some certain point it has to be overthrown. So that's why kings have really disappeared into history much more in recent years. But the same with apartheid. And the end of apartheid. Apartheid, in my opinion, perhaps ended on paper, but the 1956, if I'm not mistaken, Land Act is still in effect today. The majority of black people still live in the homelands, which is now townships. They were placed in disproportionately in the 1950s.
I don't always see that as a bad thing. I see the part where I will explain to you where I don't see it as a bad thing. See, the bad part is that black people were oppressed by the white government to put them into townships so they can stay there and remain poor. That is a bad thing. Now, we live in a time where, we're free over 30 years. Now we can argue the South could be the government and everything. But now we had a discussion where we actually agree the power should be with the people. Now, power should be within the people, where you say mental richness, where people need to start building out of that. This is why I asked you early on, why, if you're being an activist for black people, which you cleared that you're not necessarily all for, why don't you teach black people, say, look, white people, 60% of the white people's wealth is inherited through the family, right? They write out wills, they have some sort of structure. Black people, why don't you do the same? How many township houses are there and then boom, they go vacant? We don't know who's the owner. What about RDP? RDP has been given by the government. None of them formalize it.
Because we're talking about the government, which is one thing I've extensively advocated against.
Right.
But
that government example was just that one example. It's like, it's your RDP now. Why don't you formalize and give it down to your kids?
Yeah. So that's the relief, right? Let's say we give a person a house. How does the government now create sustainability? We need to build highways, for example. We need to build skyscrapers. We need to create employment. And we don't need to give it out on tenders. And that's where it's been going wrong. The government has not been implementing phase 2, which is sustainability and growth, correctly, because that's where it goes wrong. Everyone wants a Mercedes, everyone wants a big house, and that's where it's being distributed inadequately. I advocate for the historical injustices to be corrected, whether that be on Afrikaans people's side or Zulu people's side or whatever. Nelson Mandela said, if the ANC does to you what the apartheid government did to the people, do to them what they did to you, right? I agree with what Nelson Mandela said in that regard. I'd be the first to hold whoever it is accountable if the roles were reversed. I'm a humanist. I believe in the role, in the ideals and ideas of humanism. We can...
Believe it or not, same here. I'm a humanist to that degree, so I'm with you there. What I'm saying, which I don't think you're quite picking up, is that there's a racial fight, and this racial fight is just being perpetuated by political agendas. There's no real, like, I don't hate you because you're white. I doubt you hate me because I'm black, right? But then they keep putting it. But now your activism is
through populist ideas.
Through populist ideas, right?
Yeah.
So your activism is political activism. I would say, why don't you be a cultural activist? Because if you look at black people, right? And I love my black people. I'm black, right? There's no doubt about that. And I hate it when people write and say, he wants to be a white person. I don't want to be a white person. I'm a handsome, black, successful, good-looking black man. I'm happy with that. It's to say that there is pernicious cultures amongst black people. For example, let's go to the clubs. Do you see white people busy popping bottles somewhere in Heidelberg? No. They go to cheap bars and buy 60 Rand specials. There's two Brunnerwein and Coke. You want to see black people, what they do? They come to Santon
But
from
that's a
wherever
very
they come
big
from.
generalization.
It's a generalization, but an important one. They go to Santon, spend $5,000 to show that they have the status. White people are busy buying Renault, Peugeot, and those kind of cars. What are black people buying? They're making sure that they buy the Mercedes-Benz. Why are not black people being taught by someone who's white? Like, he's like, you know what, that's a pernicious culture. And this is why white people are able to carry their generational wealth through and through. And as a white person that has succeeded in that generationally, how about you pick up on those things, those advantages? Because from where we see it, you could be successful in a generation or two.
Yeah. So I'd say that it's very important to keep any person accountable, whether they're white or black. But I bring it back to the Land Act. When we move people into townships and we create a central economic hub in the city center in Sandton, and you disproportionately put people in townships in millions and ask them to travel inwards and outwards every single day and take care of their children whilst not having access to cars, while having to take unreliable taxis and all of that, and with bad
Show me
crime
one place in the world that doesn't exist.
and all of that.
Except South Africa has the word townships.
But I'd tell you that poverty exists in Africa, and I've been to many countries in Africa. Townships don't exist in Africa.
Yeah, so that's why I say that township is only a South African concept. That I understand.
Because we had the Land Acts in the 1940s and 50s that I know you don't believe this necessarily, but 93% of wealth was taken from the black majority and was placed in the hands.
It's not that I don't believe that. I know that
6%.
I know that to be a fact.
So
that I know to be a fact.
Now we need to ask, how do we expect, with empathy, a 5-year-old black boy in Khayelitsha or in a township wherever in Gauteng to perform the same way a white person does in the suburbs with high fences and security nets and electricity all day with generators and the good qualities of life? How do we expect a black boy with empathy, right, to perform and to outperform his, like many people say,
two word problems. So I understand your question already. How do we expect them to get to the place where white people are at the same standard? We don't. We shouldn't expect that. See, the word there is expect and perform, right? So now we understand that there's difficult circumstances for a large group of people in South Africa. That is a fact. The thing is that I say deal with the social economics first before we deal with the political economics. Teach black boy, teach underprivileged boy or girl that, hey, these things that you're doing are working against you. Now, if you had to do this...
What car do you drive?
AMGs.
How does a person... I don't own a car, but I came with my mom's Haval today, which is a pretty fancy car. It's a nice car, I'd say.
See,
that's
the thing. You see, as a white person, you found that fancy. A black person wouldn't have found it fancy because of how black people are cultured.
No, wait.
And I love my black people. It's just I got to call them out, you know? And I'm trying to also, sorry, because I keep interrupting you, but the thing is I'm trying to stay away from the optics. So I'm not anti-black or anti-white. I'm anti-bullshit.
I hear you. But my point is, how do we expect, as people with cars, right, and not just fancy cars, but with good cars, to go to a boy in Alexandra who hears gunshots every day, who lives in a very tight spaces with very high crime rates, and who lives in a house probably with 3 or 4 people, right? Very tight spaces. How do we as people with privilege and power and wealth, how do we expect that young boy to live out of his daily existence by reading a book about how to make a business successful when his mindset
is in survival mode?
No,
I understand. This is what I'm trying to answer. The thing is, these things are fixed over generations, but it's fixed over us as a people. It's not fixed by the government. The government is making sure that continues. While I'm like, yo, you're the white person, you too privileged. Shush and sit in your corner and just give us your money, right? And then we'll talk about redistribution.
Which is not what I advocate for.
Correct. So we on the same page there. So let me
when I advocate for the redistribution of wealth, very quickly, I do think we have to take it back to people's willpower. When we take away all of this wealth from white people, the 7% population, how do we expect them to perform and have willpower to do what they need to do when everything has been taken away from them? So I do advocate for the redistribution of wealth, but how do we approach it?
How do you think it should? Because I've got an idea, but I want to see how would you do it. So let's take white people's money and give it to black people. How would you do it?
I wouldn't necessarily do that per se, because that would create a lack of willingness to go to work and to be successful, because you have to start from the beginning. Everything was just taken away from you. What's the meaning of life then? I would advocate for perhaps limiting wealth. Right?
Limiting wealth.
Perhaps.
Okay,
in some sort. And perhaps... you back to Marx. And perhaps saying that, look, taxes has been one way, but I would say that it's great. We need politicians, we need sports people, and yes, we need business people. But do you need 100 billion rand or $100 billion? No, you don't. Because as a person, you'd probably be fine with $1 billion. But who needs $1 billion? So let's say it's okay. Everyone is allowed to make 300 million rand. We inspire people to do so. But we draw a limit and say, when you've acquired this much wealth, you should probably either, from this point on forward, giving 50% away to charity, and you can keep the other 50.
There's NGOs that are becoming rich out of that kind of situation. You know what? Actually, you and I are not too far on something. This is going to be the first time on this channel I've ever expressed this. Land expropriation without compensation, because it feels a little too complex for me, it's hard to actually speak on it. But here's what I think. Redistribution of wealth. I think we could start off with white people that are at least net worth 10 million plus and say to them, look, there's a program called BE, but we're going to re-engineer it, right? We do it like this. Now, we take 10% of your wealth or 20% of your wealth, depending on how wealthy you are from that 10 million upwards. And you're going to choose a set of people that can be candidates to start businesses in socially. You're going to pick people within the 50, 100 kilometers radius, and you're going to start an incubating process. It is a very short one. And say that we would like you to become managers, including owners. Now you start giving equity shares, whether it's 50, 50, 70, however, whoever can do the actuary's number better than I did, should. Then over a period of 3 years, that person has their own business that they run by themselves, and then the white people pull themselves out of there, making no profit, but also making no losses. Now, how many of the 7% of the black white people are worth 10 million and more? Quite a large number. How many? I'm not quite sure. But that's a good start. And over time, that could happen. That is so much better than land expropriation without compensation, because we go look at other countries that did not work.
But still, we have to talk about the fact that to Africans, Africa is an ancestral homeland, and there has to be some sort of geography to it. What I'm advocating for is not just giving people opportunities to acquire wealth, which is what people say power is. I want people, my definition of power is not just the right to vote and the right to acquire wealth. The definition of power is what your vision is and what you choose to do with your future and your ability to do that successfully as a people, right? For the last 30 years, the government, institutions in power, business, NGOs and NPOs, they've given people opportunities, but it has not lifted people out of poverty. And we have to ask, to a certain extent, if we keep giving the government half of our tax and we contribute to the ANC government, when do we start holding them accountable? How long is it going to take to take away poverty? We have to. It is the government's responsibility.
I think the country's been holding the ANC accountable. It's just they just don't know how, and they've already found a way to hold on to that power, but it's slowly decaying. What I am saying, which you and I have said earlier, is let the power come back to the people. I said re-socially engineer them as far as their culture is concerned. You mentioned something about, Africa being an ancestry land. That being true, look around the world. The most indigenous people are not there anymore. The English don't live in England anymore. The Germans don't even live in Germany anymore. Around the world, that's the case. That's how it's always been. So adapting is one of the words that I wanted to take from you as well. But closing that topic and moving on is that I wanted to say that we need to be careful as a people of optics, because we live in a world of optics. Does it sound good as opposed to is it practical? Right?
Is it moral?
Is it
right?
Moral is a hard one to do. Now, I'm not trying to say, okay, throw morals out the window. It's because where's the compass? We have so many magnets on this compass and we keep moving. This is moral today. That's not moral today. That's an issue. Your activism and I want to call you out on this one, is that your activism seems to be moral, but the thing is, where is the direction? It's hard to tell because politics have already obscured our heads. Do you know a gentleman called Joe Slovo?
Yep.
We do see the street down the road when we go to Johannesburg Central. What do you know about him?
Well, I know he was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. I know he was an activist. I wouldn't call him my favorite historical read or analysis, but I know about Joe Slovo. He was quite accompanied by quite a few other activists, as well as Nelson Mandela.
Do you know why he was immortalized?
Why do you think?
Because he was with the ANC. But now people started to criticize him as a white person, right? I think he was born in Lithuania or something, but he was of Russian descent, something of that sort. And he was a communist. Yeah, somewhere in the Balkans. And do you know why they started having issues with him? Is because it's like, okay, it's a white dude that doesn't really understand what it means to be black. He's doing this for all optics, and they found him disingenuous. I'd like to say, be careful, right? I like you, a white dude, and I need to take out this white in the conversation, but it's just for the sake of the understanding. You're a young man who's got a good head on the shoulders, who's intelligent, who reads, who can think, and has got a direction that he's walking in. But the thing is that the world is so fickle. At any given point, they can change. Today, you're a good guy. The next day, you're a villain, right? And just being the same guy. It depends on the climate of things. So what I would suggest is go look at the things at a wider perspective. I'm actually rooting for you. We're not on the same political ideologies. We're not. But I still root for you because I do think you're a good guy. But just be careful of that obstacle.
I appreciate that. I do agree with you that optics, let's be honest, 90% of politics probably is optics. It's how you present yourself, right? So what it is to me is I've been an advocate for equality and decolonization and all of that since I've been 14 years old, when I left religion and organized religion.
That's crazy. It's like 14, I was worried about kicking balls around. So that's big.
How old are you?
40.
You're 40?
Yeah.
I thought you were in your 20s, to be honest.
Everybody thinks I'm in my 20s.
Yeah, you look very good for your age.
Thank you.
I'm flabbergasted now.
Black don't crack. Yeah, I'm turning 40 this year. As a matter of fact, I want to go to Vegas and celebrate my 40th. Just go wild.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought now. What face cream do you use?
I actually don't use any face cream.
You'd agree with me that Africa needs independence from both the West and the East, because I think I'd agree with you that you need to call out optics. When the ANC has been doing bad for 30 years, and we give them credit where they need credit, but when they align with the East in disingenuous ways, with dictators and imperialists and all of that, we call it out. It's on both the West and the East, but you'd agree with me that Africa needs independence from both of these powers to create a future for Africans. And when I say Africans, I mean African people.
Do you mean black people?
I mean black people, but I also mean Africans geographically, people who belong to the African continent and who wants to contribute.
Some with you there.
To the African continent.
So you as African as I am.
In geography, yeah?
Period. I do not want to hear, no, you guys came in 1652, and the other people were here. You African. As long as you've been here long enough to be African, you African, right? And that applies to me too, and that will apply to my generations to come and your generations to come. The thing here is that the politics is trying to separate us. I think we need to come together. Again, we disagree on maybe half of the stuff that we spoke about today. You're not less of an African than I think that you are. That should be the case. We need to be in unity. South Africa needs to see itself as South Africa, not as a racial group. Zulu, Tswana, speak the languages, practice the culture. I mean, those are beautiful things, right? Those are very, very
Be an
beautiful
example for the rest of Africa.
Correct.
So we can create that mentality in Africa and perhaps one day have a more united Africa, which would be very strong on a global scale.
See, there we agree.
Yeah.
See, so we agree for the most part. Now, last question that I want to ask before we close up. What are your white privileges? And I'm going to tell you my black privileges.
I think sometimes, and I speak about this extensively, I grew up in privilege. I grew up middle class, right? I didn't go to a private school. I went to public school. But I had privileges. I got to fly to Cape Town or Jeffreys Bay or wherever December's and go and have a nice holiday and not be worried about what I will be eating tonight, right? I was privileged and I am still privileged, but privileged in the sense of mental privilege. I do think white people have much more than that than black people do because we come from a position of power historically. Slave trade, the colonialism, the expansion of Christianity and all of that, the later expansion. We come from a position of mental privilege and we need to acknowledge that and deconstruct that, not as a means to tell my African brothers that they are superior to me and I need to kneel down to them, but to understand that my black brother is just as human as I am. And we need to have empathy towards one another because usually anything that looks different to me in nature is stranger danger. And that is what we need to break. We're all human. We all have the same goals and ideas. We want our children one day to be happy and successful. That's what it is.
Okay. From my side, my privilege is just taking the same route that you've explained it in. Is that I was born into a rich family. My dad is black. My mom is half, what do they call colored, in our time. Got in there rich, but my dad treated me like a middle-class child. He was rich. He told me, look, I will impart all the knowledge that you need to have. You're going to wake up every day at 4:45 every morning. You're going to read the Bible with us. Then you're going to prepare to go to school, come back and cut the grass and make sure that the house is in order every single day. If not, you're going to get a whipping. I saw that as, wow, that's crazy. Today, I look at that as my dad and my mom, who I've lived with my whole life, has imparted some of the greatest knowledge with me in various ways. I didn't just fly to Cape Town. I flew all over the world, lived in different parts, and also got some of that knowledge there, and that was my privilege. Now, what is my black privilege? Well, aging. Don't age. That's a good one. 2, BEE, although I've participated very minimalistic in South Africa, has been my privilege. 4, being black has been the coolest thing that's ever happened to me, especially through traveling and in South Africa. Now, your privilege and my privilege combined is a powerhouse. And that's what I look forward to a South Africa. Let's combine our privileges and start teaching. You're much younger than I. You young enough for you to call me uncle.
Yeah, or dad.
Right. But your collaboration with mine, irrespective of where we come from, irrespective of our wealth, irrespective of our health, we could learn from each other and teach. So can we do that collaboration?
Well, I do think it's important that people from different spectrums get together, talk about things, debate, intellectually fight about it, because that makes you find common ground. It's very boring and stupid to agree with about everything all the time. And I do think debating and talking about it stimulates the one thing we have in common as human beings, as a species, the ability to debate and reason and articulate. And we should use that.
On that note, don't stop. Keep going. I think people like you are necessary. You people are necessary in political, also in culture. As you grow older, you will learn certain things and also navigate or even have 10 toes on the ground eventually. So keep going. Just keep your eye not only on the prize, but on the right track. Morality is a very hard one to determine in our time now because everything has gone skew. But keep going because I believe that you're necessary. And please stop these threats that you're throwing around. It's unnecessary. You have people have sleepless nights when people like him are necessary in communities, in the country, and so much more. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
We could do this again, definitely. So on that note, like, comment, subscribe, and make sure that you give us your take on what y'all thought this episode was about. And if you want us to do another one, you know what to do. Type it out. Be respectful. So until next time, peace out.